Hi everybody, my name is Larry Salibra. I'm a founder of a software testing company called Paperbugs. I'm also a co-founder of the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong.
Hello everyone, I'm co-founder and CEO at Remitsy, and I've been in China since 2004.
So I put this, so I blame me if this isn't clear, but maybe some key terms we should talk about, and I'm trying to see, maybe we'll first, can you give us a couple of buzzwords in the cross-border payments industry that maybe people should be aware of when they're making payments? Is that a trick question?
One of the keywords I think everybody should be aware of is the mid-market rate. I think there can often be a little bit of confusion about what that actually means. Normally when you get an exchange rate through your third-party payment provider or through a bank, it'll usually be their own exchange rate, and they'll be earning a little bit of a commission on that. And then sometimes you'll often see on, for example, Chinese domestic banking websites, they'll have two prices for the exchange rate, which is the buy and the sell prices. The mid-market rate is the price between those buy and sells. This is what we like to call the real exchange rate. And if you're ever exchanging any currencies outside of this price, you're losing money. And I think it's really key for everybody to be aware of this mid-market rate. As for any other specialist terms, I think we'll probably get up to them.
Okay. Larry, anything? Right here.
I mean, in other words, just the spread, which is the subtracting the buy from the sell, and you want that spread to be as small as possible to save yourself money.
Okay, cool. So, of course, the first thing I think we think about with international cross-border payments is currency. So, I mean, even just recently, a lot of these big software accounting companies didn't have multi-currency. Like I used QuickBooks many years, and it was really hard to work with, still hard to work with multiple currencies in your books. So maybe you highlight some of the advantages and then disadvantages that you would know of for business owners like us with multiple currencies in our books.
Well, one of the things you need to think about is where you're set up and how that country taxes currency conversions. So one way to do the accounting, when you do double entry accounting, is to account for a currency through a currency trading account. That way, like for example, if you buy US dollars at one price at the beginning of the year and then you sell it later, you may have either a gain or loss, and you may, depending on where you're located, have to pay a tax on that gain or loss, or count that in your profit. So I guess there's really it's really a big negative because it really increases the complexity of accounting for small businesses. And if you're located in a country like the US or maybe a lot of the EU where everybody pretty much uses one currency, it will significantly increase your accounting costs because most accountants aren't really familiar with multiple currencies. Not as big of a problem in Hong Kong.
I think another thing to bear in mind is that everybody's payment requirements are completely different. Every business is quite unique. And so there's a lot of different considerations when you're choosing which currency to use. I think at the moment, the US dollar is king, and everybody's using US dollars to pay their international suppliers and also get paid from their customers, but it's not necessarily the best choice. Some of the problems with accepting a currency which isn't your own is that it's very difficult to hedge out that risk, the currency risk. So let's say you've got 30-day or 60-day payment terms. During that time, you could have a lot of currency fluctuations, and it's very hard to predict the profit margin that you're going to be having on your products. Also, when using US dollars, if you're a country that is outside of the US dollar economy, which is generally most of the countries, what you're having to do is exchange from your currency into US dollars, and then from US dollars into the receiving currency. Sometimes that's all right if you have US dollars on an account, but that means you're having to store US dollars outside of your cash flow, which can also have consequences for that.
Banking, Larry asked a good question earlier, and banking has been a hot topic as always, but it seems like it's getting a little bit scarier now and regulated more. And I kind of put walls on online walls. Care to tap into what you're seeing in banking regulations?
Coming from a fintech perspective, we're a fintech startup, and regulations are probably our biggest difficulty. So I kind of sympathise a little bit with the banks, because I think they have a lot of regulations imposed upon them, a lot of risk of being fined. Even for a startup like ourselves, if we did process the wrong payment, that would put us out of business immediately. So I kind of sympathise, but at the same time, I think it's getting increasingly difficult, as was mentioned earlier, to even just set up a bank account in somewhere like Hong Kong. But I hope that through some of these new fintech products, that there'll be more solutions for people to set up banking solutions.
Yeah, as I asked earlier, I mean, it's really a big problem in Hong Kong, getting bank accounts. It's many places have this problem, but in my experience, like the US is actually very easy to get bank accounts. You can set up a new business account from abroad online. It takes like a week or two. I just did that a couple weeks ago. So really, if banking is if you're having trouble getting a bank account, you need to like pick and choose your jurisdiction and go where you can get that relationship. And choose one in a way that makes the most sense for your business, like where your customer is and what currency they'll be paying in.
I mean, the U.S. banks are I think it's for Americans, it's easy. Is it for non-Americans easy to get them?
I mean, there's services now, like there's a payment provider called Stripe. They're a VC-funded company from the Valley. They offer something called Stripe Atlas, $500 US. You set up a US company, bank account, and a payment processor. They'll handle it all for you. I haven't used it personally, but they're offering this service specifically for foreigners. Mostly companies like my own who are software as a service. We sell online, we have a platform, we sell in US dollars. We're selling to the world. It doesn't really matter where we are. It just needs to be someplace where we can accept money cheaply and be able to have a banking relationship. And so services like that, hopefully that will be offered in other countries as well, or companies like Mike can offer similar products for Hong Kong and other jurisdictions. But yeah.
Actually, I don't want to put you on a spot, but yeah, Remitsy, so yeah, you have to put an invoice to make a payment to the supplier. You haven't really talked much about your maybe it'll be a good chance for you to kind of explain how regulations, so if I want to pay a supplier, they need to give me a proper invoice, and then, because this has actually been a problem, I think this is why these regulations are getting more difficult in Hong Kong, is because there was an article a couple weeks ago, not related to Panama Papers, but related to a guy in Israel that used Hong Kong and Chinese companies to launder money and scam multinational corporations by making really high invoices from Chinese factories and giving them a commission on the sale to like launder money through a supplier in China. So I guess you guys banks are responsible, it seems like, by regulators to make sure that these transactions are real transactions. Is it, or?
Definitely, it's a huge difficulty. We require an invoice because we need to prove that source of revenue, which I think Charles mentioned earlier. You need to prove where that money came from and that it's going to a legitimate business. We also have to perform due diligence on who's sending the money, due diligence on the people receiving the money. If there's any kind of sense of doubt about the business that's being performed, we just can't process it because it's just too risky. But having that invoice gives us a little bit of kind of background on what services, what goods are being provided, and whether it's a legitimate business. Actually, it's global. So each jurisdiction has their own regulators, but the US is actually exerting a lot of regulatory pressure everywhere. For us, it's actually more sensitive for us to handle US dollar transactions because despite the fact we're handling them outside of the US kind of exerts its power in places like Hong Kong, places like China. So we have to be particularly careful when dealing with US dollars. I think most of these regulatory problems are kind of emanating from there, but they do exist elsewhere.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I also think that though, I mean, the US is sort of leading in this, but like countries like China that actually also tax their citizens on worldwide income just haven't really enforced it. They're very interested in going after their officials that take money abroad and hide it in the U.S., in the EU. So they're also like, oh yeah, FACTA. Okay, that sounds like that's great. Let's make an agreement with you, and then we'll exchange information. That way, you can find out information about your citizens, and I can find information about my citizens who may be evading tax. I think that many places, unlike Hong Kong, that Hong Kong doesn't tax. Hong Kong only taxes based on income earned in Hong Kong. Most places tax their residents on their worldwide income, or in some places like the U.S., citizens on their worldwide income. So they want to like track down like money they're losing abroad. So when someone like the U.S. comes along and says, "Hey, let's exchange information," they're not going to push back that hard enough.
Just another thing to add to that. Actually, the risks posed by this international system make it actually very, very difficult to use solutions like SWIFT or, for example, PayPal. I think often these payments will get red flagged, often for no reason or what feels like no reason, and that'll mean the payment doesn't go through. Now, if you're paying a supplier, production doesn't start, the shipment doesn't get shipped, so it can become a really huge problem. Whereas if you're operating in the domestic banking systems, there's usually much less kind of hoops to jump through, and you're much less likely to have that payment red flag.
Buzzword, ACH, I don't know, I'm curious, what is that? That's more US based?
ACH stands for the Automated Clearinghouse. It's a system in the US for payments that are processed sort of T+1. So you send money today, it arrives tomorrow, and the way it works is every night or early in the morning, the clearinghouse goes through all the transactions, and they sort of net out the balances between different banks, and the deposit into people's account. It's also a way to put money to someone's account. It's also a way to take money out of people's account. So in the US, when you pay a bill online, or when you write someone a check, what actually happens is they make this electronic transfer that like sort of sucks money out of your account. That's why in the US, we treat our checking account numbers as confidential information, because if I have your checking account number and your routing number, I can take money out of your account.
I think ACH isn't particularly relevant to cross-border payments, but I think a point that it does raise is that generally the domestic banking systems are very efficient. They're actually quite high-tech. So if you're in Hong Kong, for example, or the UK, you make a national bank payment. It's usually instant, with zero fees. ACH I'm not very familiar with, but I'm sure it's a lot faster than making an international payment. And actually for cross-border business, where the difficulty lies, where the old kind of traditional SWIFT network exists, it was invented in 1971 before the internet. That's where all this friction is. And if you could jump over that SWIFT system and just operate in domestic banking networks like we do, then you can save yourself a lot of hassle.
Yeah. And then SWIFT. So then SWIFT isn't. So I made these up. So SWIFT is that international, like is ACH like maybe domestic US? I guess?
Yeah. So generally, if you make an international payment, in most instances, it's going to be going through the SWIFT network, especially if it's from US, Europe to Asia. If you're in Europe, there are other international systems that you can avoid, that you can use to avoid SWIFT. But like I said, it was invented in 1971. Hasn't been upgraded very much. They're talking about upgrading it now, but I think that's probably a few years off. And it essentially is a network of correspondent banks and FX markets. And whenever you make a transfer, it's not just from your send bank to the receive bank. It's actually bouncing through all of these different banks. And each one of these banks and FX markets is taking its cut and requires a fee. And if there's lots of third parties where the payment can get lost. So there's a lot of problems that can cause there.
It's important to understand also that SWIFT is actually not sending money, it's sending a message that says, my bank wants to move money from this account to this other account. And that's so like, there's a message, but then there's a bunch of people doing physical, manual paperwork, or like controlling their own electronic systems. That's why it's sort of unreliable. It could take 1 day, could take 3 days, could take more. So it's just messaging. It's like, hey guys, let's move this money. And then it takes a while where they like crank the gears and make it happen.
And the messaging is just one way as well. So if something goes wrong, it's very, very difficult to find out where that money is, when is it going to arrive. And so you have to send another message through the system, through the exact same network, which takes exactly the same amount of time to kind of request a kind of check on the progress of that payment. And I think if any of you have ever had a payment stuck, which I'm sure probably most people, if you've done cross-border business, have had, You know that any kind of delays that are caused are usually days and sometimes weeks.
Yeah, just to add, I actually totally had that problem. I sent money from HSBC in the US to a Bank of China account in Guangzhou, and the money was stuck for about 3 months. The problem was that I didn't know what name they put on my Bank of China account because my name is very long and it was just cut off on the book. So I just typed in like the last letter that I saw, but it turned out they put my whole name in the computer. So it didn't match and they couldn't get the money to send back. I ended up having to call HSBC in the US on the phone, stand in line for 2 hours, have them like talk like customer service to customer service before I could get it resolved.
And it's just, I mean, it's pretty crazy when you think of all the kind of internet technology and startups and how smooth everything is in all other industries. And yet in the banking industry, if something goes wrong, you have to call somebody up and wait in line. Like, that shouldn't be the case.
Or use the fax.
Or use a fax, exactly. Telex sometimes, right?
I almost blew a blood vessel in my neck once. I was in, just moved to China, and after Mike Bellamy's advice to spend more time here, and I sent a lot of money over, like before Chinese New Year, and my name didn't match, and they were like closing the next day for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, what? They're like, oh, just come back after New Year. We'll just have to take care of it later. I'm like, take care of it. It was like a lot of money for me, and I didn't have much time either side of the world. And they said they could only make like 3 exceptions a year, and I was one of them. So they made it. I had to prove my name on both sides was the same and everything. It's really nuts. They made it work though. Bitcoin. So you guys are both involved in Bitcoin in some way or another. So we got some claps. Maybe, how many people probably heard the word Bitcoin? Okay, heard the word. How about know or use Bitcoin? Maybe, okay. So I think we need a little bit explaining here.
Yeah, so my background is, I used to work in manufacturing and export. I started in fine dispersion machinery and finished in cement machinery, so really, really traditional industries. But then I bought a bit of Bitcoin, the price went up and I got completely obsessed. And I basically decided that I had to do anything I could to get into the industry. And then I forced China's biggest Bitcoin exchange, OKCoin, to give me a job. And so I started my Bitcoin journey there. So I worked there for a year and then came out to start Remitsy using Bitcoin technology to do these currency conversions. But I mean, do you want a background on Bitcoin or what?
I just feel like I think people hear the word and they think hacker, and they think like drugs and the Silk Road, right? I think, is that what some people think when they hear Bitcoin? In Chinese TV, I was trying to get my wife to understand Bitcoin, and you see like a hacker logo on the Bitcoin logo next to the.
Unfortunately, that's the case, and I think.
I had someone recently. We were discussing Bitcoin, and and I was trying to explain some of the benefits, and they said to me, "Isn't that funny e-money?" Funny e-money.
Yes, it is.
Magic money or whatever. There's lots of,
So I guess maybe, or is it used for bad stuff?
anything, cars, the internet, everything has bad uses and it has good uses. So I think Bitcoin falls into that category. There's good people and bad people both using it. But it's a completely new technology. It allows people to do things that they couldn't do before, especially in cross-border business. I take a much more practical approach. I'm not very good at the theory side, and I'm especially not good at explaining it. Larry, I think, is a bit more heavily steeped in the Hong Kong Bitcoin Association, so I'll let him give a very, very kind of brief overview of what
I know
Bitcoin
it's
is.
gonna be really hard to
No
give
pressure.
a full explanation, but
So I guess it's difficult to explain, but I'm going to try it this way. So most of us here run businesses, and we're familiar with accounting and accounting ledgers. So you can sort of think of Bitcoin as a worldwide global accounting ledger, where every Bitcoin account has an entry, and every person running this software has a copy of the accounting ledger. And then when you make a transaction from sending money from one account to another, it updates that ledger, and then everybody has a copy of that ledger, and then there's some code that runs and some math that's done that decides whether or not the transaction was valid and which copy of the ledger is right. And so basically what it lets us do is it lets us sort of send money back and forth, send information back and forth without a trusted third party like a bank or a financial institution, which is something that we really couldn't do before.
Yeah, just to kind of elaborate on that, what that actually means is that we can now make a transaction between two people without going through any, like Larry says, third parties. We can finally make payment. Before, that was not possible. If you ever made a payment to somebody, it was always through a bank or through PayPal. Now you can finally make a payment direct to that person. Also, because it's based on code, there's all sorts of interesting new stuff you can do with it, such as smart contracts, things like a letter of credit, which I think is quite relevant to everybody here. You can actually build that into the Bitcoin blockchain and have these contracts executed automatically. And then that would give you access to lots of kind of trade finance tools that usually are kind of completely locked off from SMEs.
So, you know, you guys are both here in Hong Kong and China involved in this Bitcoin. Maybe some example, well, you kind of just a little bit gave some examples, but maybe give some practical examples of how it is used or could be used for our kind of businesses.
So I can't speak for Hong Kong, but for mainland China, I think it probably has the second biggest Bitcoin industry in the world. Unfortunately, the majority of that is, well, I say unfortunately, maybe it's not a bad thing, it's dedicated towards speculation, basically people trading on the value of Bitcoin. And there's also a lot of mining there too. But I think a lot of people looked at the future of Bitcoin and blockchain technology, and there's lots of people talking about the amazing stuff that can be done in the future. But I think there's within the industry there's a kind of consensus that maybe one of the first killer applications of the technology is cross-border payments, cross-border remittance. Because at the moment the cross-border remittance system is so old, so antiquated, and so expensive, and so inefficient. Through this technology, you can actually make these payments much cheaper, much faster, and much more smoothly.
So how many people in here accept credit cards for their business, like for payments? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people pay like small contractors with like PayPal or something like that? Freelancers? Okay. So in my experience, at least in my business, I find Bitcoin really great as sort of an alternative to both of those. So for example, you have a customer wants to buy your product, credit card fails, just not approved. So you ask them to change the credit card, they change it, also fails. Still want to buy your product. What are your options? Well, you can try to do an expensive wire transfer, but if it's a small value product, it won't make sense. With Bitcoin, you can say, okay, well, if you still want to buy, you're welcome to send me Bitcoin, and I'll send you the product. And the great thing about accepting Bitcoin is you have no chargeback risk. There's no way they can get the money back from you. So you put all the risk on the customer. So if the customer still wants to buy it, they can go through with the transaction. The same thing with paying people. Maybe you have freelancers in countries where PayPal isn't accepted, so it's very expensive to pay them. Or maybe their account gets frozen or gets hacked, which has probably happened to many of us here before. You can say, okay, well, I'd love to hire you, but you need to send me a Bitcoin address, which they can do by dialing an app on their phone. And then you can pay them with Bitcoin, and there's no chance of the payment being denied. And then once they receive the money, they can either keep it or they can sell it on one of many markets or trade it with someone else. So it's really a way when your traditional payment systems have a problem, you can go to Bitcoin as a backup.
There's nobody at PayPal's here yet.
I think everybody's aware that PayPal sucks, right? I don't think anybody in the room likes PayPal. I don't think anybody in the world likes PayPal. The fees are very, very high. According to our calculations, between 6 and 9%. I think everybody who's using PayPal should really look into how much value is being lost whenever they're using PayPal.
Oh, you want to say something?
I can say, so the people that don't know Stripe, it's a company based in the US, and their big innovation is before, when you accepted credit cards, you had to apply for a merchant account, and then also there was an underwriting process because there's risk of letting you accept credit cards, so you often had to make a personal guarantee if you were a small company. It could take, there's lots of paperwork, it took weeks. Your merchant account provider could often take your personal assets, even if your business is incorporated, if there was a debt. Stripe's innovation was you can go to their website, you don't even need to create a password, you can enter your information, click activate, and within 5 minutes you can start processing credit card transactions. And they're really, the fees are all the same for all cards, it's really great. I've been using them in the US for 3 years or so. I just got into the private in Hong Kong. I think it's going to be great for Hong Kong. One of the biggest problems we see in Hong Kong have been accepting payments from abroad. So people that want to do e-commerce, their only option was PayPal, which is horrible and expensive. So now you'll be able to accept credit cards for like 3.4%. Rumor has it they'll be able to let you cash out US dollars, so you don't even have to go through Hong Kong dollars eventually, which will be great. It'll make Hong Kong so much more competitive. Tax rates low. Probably the best place to set up an e-commerce company if you're not American.
I don't have anything to add. That's right. I look at everything from a business-to-business perspective.
Sure.
So.
So yeah, I mean, I don't want to skim, but I think, so blockchain maybe just, even I'm still kind of grasping. Blockchain seems like the cool thing, not Bitcoin is like a currency on top of blockchain. Blockchain can be used for all these other currencies. I don't want to get so technical here, but can maybe you educate me at least, or give a quick overview of blockchain and Bitcoin, or?
I think it depends how you define blockchain. If you use blockchain, or the blockchain industry, to define Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the other kind of blockchain applications as kind of one industry, then yes, it's awesome and it's growing. But I think increasingly there's an idea going around that you can detach blockchain, or there's an idea going around that you can detach blockchain from Bitcoin and from Ethereum and use just that and not actually these kind of underlying currencies. But I think from my personal perspective, there's a lot more kind of exciting uses for these public blockchains, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, that everybody can access.
Maybe, Larry, what is blockchain?
I mean, blockchain, to be honest, is now a marketing term, so it's sort of going the way cloud is going. Like, cloud can be whatever you want it to mean. So if I have a solution I want to sell to BigCo, I say, hey, I've got the solution that uses blockchain. Like, we don't really know what it means unless you really get down and look into it. But seriously, look down into like how it's implemented. I mean, we've got people that are taking what are essentially databases, like your normal database. Like, they add some things that make it look like what the Bitcoin blockchain is, and they sell it to a bank. So, I mean, the discussion of what the different blockchains are is kind of complicated, but there's essentially like two. There's public ones where anybody can use, the permissionless, and there are other ones which are essentially databases. So that's how I understand it.
Got it. So I guess we'll wrap up. But really explain what it is.
Yeah, no worries. So essentially, whenever you're paying your Chinese suppliers for either goods or services, I think you're all going to be using wire transfers, or you're going to be using PayPal or Payoneer. There's a number of different options out there. Essentially, all of these solutions have quite high fees, ranging from probably around 3% to 10%. When I say fees, what I'm referring to is the send fee, the receive fee, and then also the value that's lost in the currency conversion. And personally, I think everybody needs to get into the mind the idea that the cost of a payment isn't limited to just one side. Generally, the cost of the payment is spread across both sides. And often, when we speak to customers, they say, oh, I don't care about that, that's my supplier's cost. Actually, that cost is built into the cost of your invoice. So if you can lower their costs when it comes to the payments, you can lower their cost, then technically you can lower the cost of that invoice through a bit of negotiation. So I think everybody needs to take responsibility for the cost of that, for the entire cost of the transaction. What we do is we convert using Bitcoin. So if you're sending euros, dollars, pounds, we also do Polish zloty. I think, speaking to a few people today, it looks like we're probably going to have to adopt Hong Kong dollars. So we can take all of those as a send currency, we convert that into renminbi with Bitcoin, and we deliver that renminbi to your supplier. It doesn't matter whether it's for goods or for services, as long as it's for a business transaction, we can process it. And our fees start at 1%. So let's say you're using PayPal, you're looking at a cost of between about 6 and 10%, you're making a big saving for every single payment. And I think another thing that everybody needs to think about when they're thinking about the cost of payments in the supply chain is that it can get quite scary. If you imagine that you're receiving cross-border payments from your customers, you're subject to a lot of fees, and then you're also making a cross-border payment to your supplier. That's subject to fees. If you're buying a complex product or a complex service, they've probably got international suppliers. If you imagine all of those fees adding up, and each time it's a percentage, so it's actually stacking up, it's really, really scary. And I think everybody should be a bit frustrated and maybe even a little bit angry about how much that's costing and how much your customers at the end of the day are paying more for their products because of all these transaction fees.
Okay, cool. So you make sure you guys get one of our key sponsors too. So thank you, Remitsy, and make sure you talk to them about maybe potentially using it for your business and giving them some feedback. You also have a drawing at the end of today.
Yeah. So we've got a survey that we'd love everybody to fill in. We've got a prize draw later on with a Xiaomi Bluetooth speaker. It's the gold edition, so that's really cool. So if everybody could fill in that survey, that'd be really helpful for us. We're still developing our product. You can use it today, but we're still kind of improving it. So your feedback would be really useful for us on that. And as well, if anybody has any payment problems after the talk, come and find me. I'd love to talk about it. Also, my colleague filming just now, Oliver, he's happy to speak about that too. Thanks.
Thanks. And Larry, how can people reach out to you too?
You can come find me afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you about software testing or app development, anything regarding software or Bitcoin.
Great. Okay, guys, round of applause.